seating. If you can see my socks, hello? If you can see my socks, you're just stay where you are. If you can't, move to a seat where you can see my socks.
You're on the wrong side of the antenna, that's why I'm moving.
Oh, I'm on the wrong side of the antenna. That's what my wife tells me. Thank you. Well, you like my socks? Yes, that may be the only thing I get applause for. My name is Lon Milo DuQuette, and I live just down the road in Costa Mesa. And I'm trying to turn on my technology here. Let's see. I hope this will work. Let's see. Yeah, it works. Well, I'm really honored to speak to you today about the Great Masonic G and the subject of invocation. Now, probably both of those things sound pretty dull, but my opening words here may be the most exciting things you hear today. Let me say right off the bat, I'll not be talking about the history of the G or how the G got itself associated with Blue Lodge Masonry. Instead, I'm going to get esoteric, because this is Esoteric-Con. And I'm also going to get experiential. And if my slides work, we'll go on a little experiential magical adventure. So to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about magic. I practice magic. Where is Michael Strader? Michael Strader personally made this black obsidian mirror from a block of obsidian. You cut it and polished it and made a replica of John Dee's Enochian scrying mirror. So if I don't get any applause today, Michael Strader does. I'm the envy of magicians around the world with that. My comments today are going to be based on insights I've gained over the last 50 years of personal magical practices and meditations. Since 1988, I've written quite a bit about magic, Kabbalah, and the Western mystery traditions, including Enochian magic and Freemasonry. Part of my magical work includes tarot cards, which in their own way are a pictorial flashcard set of all the Hermetic arts, Kabbalah, astrology, ceremonial magic. But those of you who know me also know that I'm a pretty normal guy. I'm a husband. Constance and I were high school sweethearts. We've been married 51 years. I am a father. This is my son Jean-Paul. He's 47. He lives with his family in China, where he teaches at the University of Macau. I'm a musician, a songwriter, an entertainer, and for as much as it goes, a recording artist. And please, I've got CDs out there at the table. And if I have to bring any of them home, my wife will say, "Didn't they love you?" So I'm begging. You don't have to listen to it.
But they should.
But they should, of course. For the last 23 years, I've been the United States Deputy Grand Master of Ordo Templi Orientis, a century-old magical society once led by Aleister Crowley. The OTO, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, are perhaps the most influential magical societies of modern times. Crowley didn't invent the OTO. It was formed in 1900 in Germany by a group of highly Greek Freemasons who wanted to explore ancient magical traditions and practices. Contrary to conspiracy theories floating around the internet, the OTO does not make Masons, nor is it led by reptiles or space aliens. Bigfoot is not a member of the OTO, and neither is Queen Elizabeth. Like my father and older brother, I'm a proud Freemason. Masonry's mystic ceremonies are inspiring and awesomely beautiful, but they're not overtly magical in nature. And while many Freemasons study and practice magic, Freemasonry doesn't teach magic. Membership in organizations can be educational and very helpful. But real magic is a very personal and private matter. Magic isn't something you do. Magic is something you are. And everything you do in life is part of your magic. Real magic isn't performing illusions and tricks to entertain an audience. Real magic isn't attempting to use supernatural powers to gain control over other people. In fact, the only thing you can really change with magic is yourself. If you want to influence others, if you want to change the world, you must first refine and master yourself. You must transform yourself into the type of wise and enlightened person whose strength of character influences others. You must become the type of person whose life and vision have the potential to profoundly change the world. The magician uses magic to master himself or herself. The magician uses magic in order to harmonize his or her own consciousness with the universal consciousness, the great architect of the universe, the source and foundation of existence itself. The magician uses magic to harmonize his or her own personal will with the trestle-born pattern of the universal laws of the cosmos. Magic is a spiritual art form, and every magician is an artist. Every magician is his or her own unique artist. And I'll go so far to say, turn that around, every true artist is a magician. What exactly is magic? It's not a religion. It's not a belief system. It's not a political ideology or philosophy. Brother Crowley defined magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Now, by this definition, any willed action, even blowing your nose, is a magical act. I know this doesn't sound very sexy, or mysterious, or exciting. Perhaps Brother DuQuette's definition might be a little more descriptive. And it's not copyrighted. Uh-oh. I take that back. Magic is a dramatic spiritual art form that awakens potentially powerful forces and energies within ourselves for the purpose of self-transformation and spiritual illumination. These forces and energies can be awakened and directed by using the subtle powers of our own creative imagination and concentrated visualization. You do magic whenever you willfully affect a change in your consciousness. And changing your consciousness changes the universe around you. I'm going to repeat that. Changing your consciousness changes the universe around you. Now, ancient magicians were superstitious. Their magic sometimes worked, but they didn't know why. Pardon me. They believed that the universe was ruled by gods and spirits and angels and demons, and that their magic somehow tricks these entities into helping them. Modern magicians are not superstitious. We view the gods, angels, demons, and spirits as dramatic metaphors, representing natural psychic powers we all possess. We understand magic from a psychological and scientific point of view, and view magic's seemingly unexplainable powers and mysteries as natural phenomena operating in partnership with our own consciousness at the quantum level of existence. Quantum physicists tell us flat out, the ultimate nature of reality is consciousness. Time, space, matter, energy are all ultimately consciousness. Physicists have demonstrated that the mere act of observing an event changes the conditions of the event. The magician is a person who consciously and with full intent becomes the cosmic observer of his or her own existence. And by means of various magical, dramatic art forms and techniques, sets to work to create a better life, a better reality, and a better universe. By using the subtle powers of our own creative imagination and concentrated visualizations, modern magicians use the symbols, ceremonies, and techniques of ancient magicians as art tools to dramatically stimulate the quantum level of our own consciousness in order to control and direct these hidden natural powers. Now, some people today find it hard to outgrow dualistic and superstitious medieval programming. I was going to name somebody, but I won't. I was told not to be disrespectful to my mother. Oh. They ask if this magic is black magic or white magic. For anyone who knows what magic is really about, both these terms are meaningless. Some ceremonial magicians might label what they do high magic to distinguish their art from the low magic of witchcraft. Conversely, some witches and neo-pagans use the term sarcastically to brand ceremonial magicians as being snobs, or even worse, Freemasons. There are others who would simply define low magic as being all things nature-based, outdoor magic, as opposed to ceremonial magic, the formal rituals of the Golden Dawn, or Aleister Crowley's magic, indoor magic. There are many others, however, who define the highness and lowness of magic from a fearful and superstitious angle. For these people, high magic is from heaven, and refers to attempting to influence God and a heavenly hierarchy of good archangels, intelligences, and spirits. And they define low magic as coming from hell and is an attempt to influence the devil and his minions of infernal spirits and demons. Now, both these scenarios put the magician in the position of a helpless slave who must kiss the butt of some kind of master to get his work done. Low magic, you gotta kiss the devil's butt. High magic. Okay, I love the internet. All I did was type God's ass and did a Google image search, and I got Michelangelo. This is from the Sistine Chapel. I digress. I just wanted this slide to linger up there a little longer. Obviously, if your brain is still trapped in this dualistic spiritual worldview, you're still imprisoned in a very limited, primitive, and draconian spiritual reality. One that is apparently supported by the scriptures and doctrines of the three great Abrahamic religions. For convenience sake, I will respectfully refer to these three Bible-based religions by a term I coined for conversations just like this one. The word is Crizzle-Mew. One popular interpretation of this dualistic doctrine posits that humans are caught in the middle of a terrible perpetual war of good versus evil, between the armies of a good God in heaven above and the minions of an evil devil in hell below. For reasons known only to the good God, the evil devil and his team have been placed in charge of human life on earth and have been given the job of tempting and tormenting human beings, prodding us to rebel against the good God and his catalog of commandments, rules, and taboos. This highly polarized way of looking at things makes everything pretty simple, doesn't it? God is good, devil is evil, angels are good, demons are bad. There are people in this world who believe quite literally that this arrangement is the only spiritual game plan in town. While I certainly do not wish to offend anyone's sincere beliefs, I must be honest. I personally do not believe in such an all-good anthropomorphic God. Neither do I believe in an all-evil anthropomorphic devil. I don't believe in a heaven where I'll be rewarded for believing correctly, or a hell where I'll be punished for my unbelief. In fact, I believe there's something terribly wrong and spiritually toxic with this entire picture. An unhealthy wrongness that has plagued the Western psyche for millennia. A primitive and superstitious phantasm of the mind. Does this mean I'm an atheist? Certainly not. In fact, I passionately believe, indeed, I worship a supreme consciousness, the great architect of the universe, That's the ultimate source of all manifest and unmanifest existence. I believe that you and I and every other monad of existence are components and reflections of the Supreme Consciousness, the Supreme Singularity. My ethics, my values, my morality are based on my conviction that the ultimate nature of this super existence is transcendently good. A good that it is impossible to define with words or understand with our meek brains. A good so infinite, there can be nothing outside itself, not even nothing. There can be no opposite to this great good. The goodness of supreme existence is spelled with the largest capital G imaginable. I call it the great G. This great G swallows everything that is so small it has an opposite. It vaporizes the concept of duality. It neutralizes all the little goods and evils. All concepts that remain so small and limited that they still have opposites. Good and evil, get over it. I say this with all due respect to people of faith. If your idea of good is so limited and small that there could be an opposite that is evil, then your good isn't good enough. If your idea of God is so limited and so small it has an opposite spiritual concept that is a devil, then your God is too small to really be God. Magic can only truly work if the magician, like the legendary King Solomon, can successfully invoke the Supreme Consciousness and to become the unobstructed creative instrument, the perfect extension and reflection of the great G. That is why in every magical operation, the preliminary invocation is the most important part of the ritual. For many years, however, I missed the point entirely. For me, invocation was a cold formality, like doffing one's hat when entering a house of worship. I'm certain my misunderstanding stemmed from the bad taste that lingered in my mouth from all the so-called invocations I squirmed through as a boy growing up Protestant in 1950s Nebraska. In a time when every drunken Moose Lodge barbecue, stock car race, scout meeting, and school convocation and football game began with a semi-coherent invocation. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Lord, look down upon these good boys as they enter this athletic field of combat. Give victory to our screaming eagles. Please don't think that I'm ridiculing the concept of giving thanks or inviting benediction of a deity prior to embarking on any serious or important undertaking. After all, that is precisely the purpose of invocation. But you can't talk your way into the living presence of the great G. You have to love your way in. It would take me many years before I realized exactly who it was or what it was that I was invoking. I knew for certain It wasn't the same dysfunctional, abusive father figure of the Grizzle Muse, or the wrathful god of birth-blinded nationalism in whose name every nation and tribe goes to bloody war. I knew it wasn't the same all-powerful, yet curiously insecure and money-starved god of oily televangelists. And I love the internet. And I knew for sure it wasn't a God who would damn me for daring to use my common sense. A moment ago I said I worship the supreme consciousness that's the source of all manifest and unmanifest existence. And that I believe the ultimate nature of this super existence is transcendently good. A good so infinitely comprehensive that there is no outside of itself, no opposite. It swallows up all concepts of duality. And if we could strip away all the superstitious absurdities and bigoted nonsense that infect people's idea of God, we would discover that the supreme consciousness, this great G, good, is the God of every religion. And its ultimate true nature is a real and tangible force, as objectively real as electricity or gravity. And the nearest word we have to describe this supreme force is love. It's the spiral monogram of the golden mean, the mathematical form of universal perfection. Physicists call it the fingerprint of God. It's the egg of the world of the mysteriously well-informed Dogon tribe of Western Africa, the original spiral of creation. The great G that the Dogons used to describe what quantum physicists have now proven that observation, the conscious act of perception, can transform a wave into a particle. By the way, you might know that the Dogons are accurately identified the dawn star Sirius as a twin star system and accurately computed its dual orbital nature 1,000 years before the telescope was invented. That Dogons. They call the great G the spider's thread and describe it as quivering in the same way that string theorists describe the quivering string of string theory. Our great G is a very big thing. The great G is not the limited totem of any particular race or family or tribe or nation or culture. The great G is too big to be the purview of any religion, cult, or philosophy. In fact, the great G is so big.
How big is it?
Okay, I knew you were away. The great G is so big, so absolute, there is only one cosmic vessel capable of containing its more than absolute absoluteness. And that's what invocation is about. Squeezing the great G into the only place in its own cosmos it can fit. And that one place is you. Now you might think it shouldn't be too hard to get in touch with the great G. After all, it's everywhere. It's completely within you and completely without you. At the moment, though, there are probably many obstacles preventing you from waking up to the reality that you already are at this very moment, wallowing in the infinite wall-to-wall bliss of great G consciousness. Unfortunately, every one of those obstacles is also you. And that, too, is what invocation is all about. Banishing all the phony little u's in order to make elbow room for the great G. Unfortunately, all those phony little u's are pretty much everything you currently mistakenly think you are. But there's a fast and extremely effective way to burn away all the phony little u's, and by doing so, create within yourself the super vacuum that will suck in the great G. I poke. It's a two-part magical technique, as old as humanity itself. The first step is falling utterly, absolutely, breathtakingly, helplessly, hopelessly, physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually in love with God. It doesn't matter who your God is. If it's a God, that'll do. The second step is opening your heart completely to receive back from God that same measure of love. Like audio feedback created by microphone that has been placed too close to a speaker, an amplifier, this simultaneously giving and receiving of love creates an ever-increasing ecstasy feedback. A sweet, shrill note of bliss that is nothing less than the pure alternating electrical current of the great G. This love is the force that creates, sustains, and destroys the cosmos. This is the experience the yogis describe as the opening of the anahata, or the heart chakra. And that's what invocation is about. That's how Solomon entered into the presence of God. I'm now going to share with you a little ritual. It whirled into my bag of magical tricks about 15 years ago. I first created it to be a whimsical meditation that I could perform mentally at the beginning and ending of my morning routine. But it soon became for me something much more. In fact, within the context of this goofy, simple ritual, I found not only a powerful banishing ritual, but also a profound and effective technique of invocation. It's one thing to have an intellectual grasp of the great G, but it's another to allow yourself to fall gushingly in love with it. Like some of you, I had a real problem with the traditional Chrism concept of God. But I realized if I was ever going to experience a proper invocation and trigger that divine love feedback that's holding all existence together, I need to discover some kind of trick to open my heart and fall in love with the great G. I needed to settle on a tangible image, a form, a personality, a name for this formless and most abstract of abstract spiritual concepts. Because the great G is everything, and any God image would do, any God name would do. For me, it would seem logical that I would use the likeness of one of the deities of my own religion. After all, my magical life is not bereft of gods and goddesses. foremost of which is a trinity of infinities that define the fundamental principles of Thelemic cosmology. We got Nui, Egyptian star goddess, goddess of the night sky and infinite space. She's the infinity of an ultimately expanded universe, the circumference of a circle. Her lover, Adi, the second deity, depicted as a winged solar disk a lot. He's the infinity of the ultimately contracted universe. The infinite point at the center of the infinite sphere. I see him sort of as the pre-Big Bang singularity. But if the circumference is infinite, and the center then would be infinite too, right? So that means they're infinitely touching, infinitely rubbing, infinite love-making on a cosmic scale. And that blissful friction creates a field of operation for the entire universe to manifest in. And that's the third deity. But first of all, I just want to point out, you see one of those behind the screen? Third in the Thelemic Trinity is Ra-Hoor-Khuit, the hot-headed, crowned and conquering child of the marriage of Nuit and Hadit. He is the field of operation for existence to exist. I guess that's the best way I can put it. Okay. So aren't these great gods? I mean, they got it all. Okay. They're profound and lovely cosmic concepts. But as much as I love my religion, I personally find it impossible to get all warm and fuzzy at the thought of loving and being loved by the cold, expanding universe, or its dimensionless center, or the hawk-headed image of everything that lies in between. If you can, good, that's okay. If my magical career was ever to evolve, I realized I would need to find a sweet and simple surrogate image of God. Something I could get all warm and fuzzy. I needed to gather all my cold, abstract infinities and bundle them together into one irresistible and lovable character that got my heart all loving. I just know that somewhere in your heart, each of you has an ideal God form, an image that would do the same trick for you. I chose Ganesha. His name starts with G. Because when I enter into the presence of God in magical visions, I can instantly and effortlessly imagine myself tiptoeing reverently into the cozy throne room of the great G and beholding the all-loving and beautiful sweet face of Ganesha. He's so cute. My heart almost giggles and swells with a flow of real love for the divine. And I can plunge my soul into the massive and cozy heart of the infinite. And just as easily, I can automatically and totally open my heart to receive the same flow of love beaming back from the great G in the person of Ganesha. His huge ears perpetually attuned to my prayers. His unjudgmental eyes lovingly bearing witness to my noblest thoughts and deeds and my vilest vanities and vices. And days in, I can comfortably rest in the curly, soft G of his great body as he rocks me into blissful sleep. Okay, I confess, I was dangerously close to becoming a real Ganesha nut. I even seriously thought about memorizing and reciting all 108 of his traditional attributes. But I'm a lazy man. And Ganesha understands that. So I resolved that I would instead routinely chant his name 108 times as a magical mantra prior to my meditations and before I performed or lectured or did anything important. A friend made me a Ganesha rosary of 108 beads, and for a while I used that to help me count off 108 Ganeshas. But I'm lazy, and so I decided to invent a quick and super easy way to silently chant the name Ganesha 108 times while counting on my fingers. Actually, I fly a lot, and I take the rosary on the plane with me. And it made people nervous with a guy with a beard. Nobody encouraged to do a rosary on the airplane. I stopped doing that before I got on the no-fly list. Okay, I decided to invent a quick, super easy way to silently chant the name of Ganesha while counting on my fingers. After much experimentation, I discovered the perfect technique. I discovered that if I sang the name Ganesha or Ganesh to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel, I need only sing 4 1/2 verses of the song. Each full verse, 24 repetitions of the name, 4 1/2 verses, 108. It works perfectly. Ganesh, 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 well, Ganesh, 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 24. 4 1/2 of those rounds, you got it. I'm happy, Ganesh is happy. Okay. This worked wonderfully as a meditation and mantra, but I discovered I could apply it as a powerful banishing ritual, and more importantly, a ritual of invocation. The banishing of everything that is not God, and the invocation of the God. Emptying myself, then filling myself with the great G. In order for you to appreciate the simplicity of this little ritual, we need to understand the magical dynamics of how the ceremonial magician moves about the temple room in a ritual, in order to direct the flow of energy that either invokes or banishes a specific magical force. This process, coincidentally, uses the form of the great G. In order to banish or send away, the general magical rule of thumb suggests movement about the temple in a counterclockwise direction. This movement travels against the sun's apparent daily pattern. Ancient magicians called it widershins. Also, spinning or rotating counterclockwise is also considered a banishing movement. You also banish by moving in a spiral pattern, starting from the center of your circle and moving counterclockwise, outward spiral, until eventually coming to rest at the far circumference of the circle. Can we see how that would push away and sort of clear your area? This creates a magical vacuum. The power of the banishing movement is dynamically amplified if the magician is also performing counterclockwise rotations while moving along the path of the outward turning spiral. It's quite a dance, and I'm not going to demonstrate it for you. Now, in order to invoke or bring in the desired magical force into yourself, you do just the opposite. You must move about the temple in a clockwise direction with the sun. Magicians call it deism. Rotating clockwise also is considered an invoking movement. The magician, where am I? Oh yeah. The magician can also invoke by moving in an inward spiral, starting at the circumference of the circle and moving clockwise until coming to rest in the center. Can you see how that sucks everything into one place? As if you were pulling back the force in the center of the temple and yourself. Again, the power of this invoking movement is further amplified if the inward turning spiral is performed in a clockwise direction, and amplified even more if you're also spinning in clockwise rotations. I call this the little vanishing invoking ceremony. I call it the Dance of Ganesha. And again, I'm not going to demonstrate. Now, this may sound complicated to describe, but like most rituals, it is much easier to actually perform or visualize than it is to read about it. Part 1, the vanishing. The magician sits down in the center of the circle, facing east, eyes closed. The entire ritual meditation is accomplished in the mind's eye. Once relaxed and settled, the magician formulates in the mind a tiny living image of Ganesha, or whatever god is going to float your boat. Standing in his colorful glory in the center of the brain. Then, the tiny Ganesha bursts forth from the brain and stands in the floor directly in front of the magician. Magically, the image of the deity is now grown about 3 foot tall. Ganesha begins to gracefully whirl counterclockwise. The magician now begins to chant the Pop Goes the Weasel mantra. Ganesh, Ganesh, Ganesh. While continuing to whirl widdershins, Ganesha begins to move in an outward spiraling circle around the magician. The spiral takes Ganesha further away from the center of the circle and the seated magician. The image of Ganesha grows in size. By the time the chant has reached the end of the first half of the first verse, Ganesha's whirling spiral dance has brought it again directly in front of the magician. But now the spiral has taken him to the far eastern limits of the temple room. The image of Ganesha is now about 12 foot tall. By the time the chant has reached the end of the second half of the first verse, Ganesha's whirling spiral dance brings him again in front of the magician, but now the spiral has carried him far out past Catalina. As the chanting continues, the spiral enlarges in geometric proportions. Ganesha is hundreds and thousands of miles tall. By the time the chant has reached the end of the first half of the second verse, Ganesha's whirling dance has now encompassed the sphere of the earth and the orbit of the moon. By the time the chant has reached the end of the second half of the second verse, Ganesha's whirling dance has encompassed the sun and orbits all the planets in our solar system. Ganesha is now many millions of miles in size. By the time the chant has reached the end of the first half of the third verse, the dance has enclosed the Milky Way, and Ganesha is now hundreds of thousands of light years in stature. By the time the chant has reached the second half of the third verse, Ganesha's spiral dance has circumscribed the local group of galaxies in the neighborhood of the Milky Way. Ganesha is now millions of light years in size. By the time the chant has reached the end of the first half of the fourth verse, Ganesha's dance has reached so far into space that the Milky Way in our local group of galaxies looks merely like one fuzzy star in the midst of billions of other stars and galaxies. Ganesha is now billions of years in light and size. I'm going to pause for a second to say this is much easier to imagine than it is to describe. Also, I want you to keep in mind, as the size of Ganesha grows, your sense of what time is being completely obliterated. You're not just pushing space to its limits, you're neutralizing time itself. By the time the chant has reached the end of the second half of the fourth verse, Ganesha's spiral dance has pushed the limits of the expanding universe. There is no beyond. There is no size bigger. Space has been transcended. The concept of center and circumference has been obliterated. There is only the one infinite immensity of Ganesha and the infinite smallness of the magician seated in the deity's dimensionless center. That's a vanishing. And now part two, the invocation. When I've grasped the absolute immensity of what I've just done, I'm ready to invoke. There are only 4 lines of the chant remaining. The infinitely large image of Ganesha now begins to gracefully spin clockwise. The invoking direction. During the first of the 4 lines of the chant, the spinning Ganesha will move in a very short inward clockwise spiral until he enters into my right ear. This movement completely drags the first 1/4 of the entire cosmos along with it and deposits it in my head. Ganesh, 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 Ganesh. Then during the second half, or the second part of the 4 lines, spinning Ganesha moves in a very short inward clockwise spiral until it enters the back of my skull. This movement completely drags the second quarter of the cosmos with it and deposits it inside my head. Ganesh, Ganesh, Ganesha. Then during the third and the fourth lines of the chant remaining, the spinning Ganesha moves in a very short inward clockwise spiral until it enters into my left ear. This movement completely drags the third quarter of the cosmos in with it and deposits it in my head. Finally, during the fourth and final line of the chant, the spinning Ganesha moves in a very short inward clockwise spiral until it enters my own forehead. Ganesha. And it drags the remaining cosmos with it and deposits it in my head. For a golden moment, there is no outside of me. I am Ganesha, the singularity of existence, the supreme intelligence, the great G. and the invocation of Ganesha is complete. That's the mindset. Solomon, in the myth of Solomon, that's what happened when Solomon entered into the presence of God. He was no longer acting just as a normal king on earth. He was acting with the full invoked force of the singularity of the great G. And that's the end of my talk.